If you've been following this channel for a while, you might have noticed that my main in Smash Bros is Lucina, and while that is 100% true, there are other characters I play a lot like Byleth and Toon Link, two cool guys who I've made videos on as well. No one asked me to tell you about my best characters, so why am I telling you about my best characters? Okay, so this video is gonna be a little more rambling and going over things rather than me telling you if you should or shouldn't have a secondary, because a lot of pro players say you should, a lot of pro players say you shouldn't, sometimes it's both. But then pretty much all the pro players do have secondaries, even the ones that say you shouldn't, but also you're not a top player probably, and neither am I, so where does that leave us? They all have pretty interesting takes too, so in this video I'm gonna go over the positives and the negatives that come with picking up a secondary. I'll give you my take on it, and then I'll try to help you how to choose one if you feel like you should. So looking at the rankings for the best players in Smash shows us that solo maining is pretty much over, and that every single top 10 player has at least one character that they use to cover up bad matchups, or if they need to change their playstyle for whatever reason. Except for SkyJ. This list alone shows us that at a top level, solo maining isn't something people rely on anymore, seeing as this trend continues down to the top 50 players, but these guys are people who dedicate their lives to this game, so the case is going to be different for everyone who's competing at a local or statewide scale, or people who are just beginning to enter competitive Smash. But at the same time, while these guys do technically have multiple characters, I've never seen Light, who is the most iconic Fox player in Ultimate right now, pick up Banjo and Kazooie, even though apparently they're one of his secondaries, and I can't even find anything on YouTube about it. Not everyone treats their secondaries the same, so keep that in mind. We're all different people at different skill levels, so what applies to some people might not apply to me or to you, and there's nothing really wrong with that. Smash is a big game, and not everyone has to play it the same way. I could make a whole video on how picking up different characters for fun makes you better. I didn't know how to read opponents properly until I picked up Dr. Mario, for example, because he's so slow, but his attacks are very strong and come out fast enough. So I found myself paying more attention to my opponent, and I started catching rolls. Picking up Pikachu because I like Thunder made me end up being more comfortable off stage, because he's really good at edge guarding, and bringing in those two learning experiences and taking them over to my main made it so that those mental habits I got from Doc and Pikachu made me better at tech chasing with down tilt, and also made me more comfortable being off stage, because while I already knew Lucina was amazing at edgeguarding, I didn't really start to dive as deep into the stage as I do now, because I had become better at managing my resources, those being my jump and my up B. I know Pikachu's recovery is way better than Lucina's, but it basically just made me enjoy being off stage more. So instead of this being a pro secondary argument, this sounds more like I'm saying you should play a lot of characters for like a week or two, but continue to only take one seriously rather than picking up one secondary. But a lot of good main and secondary combinations do come from this idea of branching out and playing characters who don't have the same strengths as your main. You could find someone who has a very different playstyle than your best character, and that might be exactly what you needed, whether that's to get a better grasp of the game or to cover bad matchups next time you're out competing. If you've done the previous point correctly, you might have ended up finding someone who is perfect for the matchups that your main doesn't do well against. As long as you're not forcing it, like picking up Joker just because he's really good, but not vibing with his playstyle as much as you do with your main, you might find someone who complements your weaknesses really well and who you actually enjoy playing as, because that's always important. But also, you might just not find anyone like that. For example, Lucina and Byleth don't exactly cover each other's weaknesses as well as I'd like them to, at least according to some matchup charts I found. But I like playing Byleth, so I don't really care. Lucina doesn't have any weaknesses that pretty much force you to counterpick anyway, so instead I use Byleth when I feel like I need to mix things up and not when I'm fighting a specific tough matchup. But for example, if you are maining someone who does make you think about matchups more than the average sword fighter main, maybe it is time to find someone to cover that. Not to outright replace your main unless you want them to, but to be able to compete without being at a rough disadvantage against someone who usually wouldn't be as much trouble to beat. I'm lucky Lucina doesn't have any crazy matchups that are just torture. Like, I could theoretically solo main Lucina until I die and just learn my bad matchups, because they're not too bad. But if you're playing as someone like DK or Luigi or the Belmonts who have very clear strengths and weaknesses, then maybe you're better off learning someone who doesn't struggle with whatever your main does, so you don't end up wasting your time getting upset over how you had a rough time grabbing Zero Suit Samus as Luigi, and instead Instead, put that time into practicing your main against more common and more manageable matchups, and have someone else in the back ready to come out whenever you need to fight specific threats. In this example, ZSS is hard to grab, especially when fighting as Luigi, who benefits a lot from grabbing. So I don't know, get someone who's good at catching landings, maybe someone with a sword or someone with quick out of shield options. Obviously not saying you should neglect your main and never practice difficult matchups, because that always helps you improve, but the argument here seems to be along the lines of, why bother with a terrible matchup when you can just bring in someone else to handle that archetype and use your main for everyone else where the matchup isn't too crazy. I mentioned earlier that picking up a secondary helps you understand the game better, and in the long run, your main as well. And while that is true, going all in on your main is something that might help you out just as much, just in a different way. I'm not you, so I'm not about to tell you if you should or shouldn't have a secondary, but there are characters in this game that don't really need to be backed up by a secondary, at least not until you're at a higher level. I mentioned this before, but Lucina doesn't have any crazy weaknesses that create unwinnable matchups. She does have weaknesses, obviously, but none that are too annoying or drastic to the point where I need to bring someone else if I want even the slightest chance of beating someone. I'm lucky to have a main that for rough matchups, I'm usually better off just learning it with some practice instead of picking up a whole new character to serve a specific purpose. If you're thinking of picking up a secondary for fun or because you think it'll help you improve like I mentioned before, go for it. In fact, I think we should all take at least some time to play characters other than our mains, but if you're looking for someone to pick up now to cover bad matchups, just make sure you know who you're maining. Because if you're like me and play a fundies character with tools that can work on pretty much anyone unless they are literally built to avoid them, then you're most likely better off putting your time into the one character and practicing specific matchups instead of just giving up and finding a secondary. Majority of the Smash cast would synergize well with a secondary, but if you main characters like Palutena or Wolf or Cloud or Lucina or any other fundamentals based fighter, you probably do have the tools you need to win against your annoying matchups, and it's only a matter of practicing and using them to their full potential. My advice if you main one of these guys, speaking from experience, learn the matchup instead. Picking up a secondary could help in some cases, but it could also stop you from being more versatile with their main, and these guys are praised for their versatility. Basically, you're better off if you only consider picking up a secondary when you're sure it won't mess with the progress you've made with your main, or when you're certain you need a counter pick for whatever reason. But of course, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm sure my advice won't appeal to literally everyone. If you main a fundies character and you want to pick someone else up anyway, go for it. Just remember, if you main one of these guys, secondaries could help you, but odds are matchups are just not that important for you, at least when compared to other fighters in this game. So we all know picking up a secondary is good for covering bad matchups, but at the same time, this doesn't mean you should just ditch your main whenever you bump into some trouble. Nobody is immune to having a bad matchup except for maybe Sonic, but sometimes sticking to the character you know the most is the best way to improve at this game, while at the same time you begin to worry less about fighting specific people or specific characters. Lucina sucks against Min Min, and every time I go to my local tournaments, I used to get my ass kicked by Min Min. This guy shows up in my path in the bracket a lot. We're friends, and I'd say we have a pretty similar skill level, but he always used to kick my ass with Min Min. I didn't end up changing characters to counter Noodle Girl because I already have Byleth and Toon Link in the back, and they also suck against her, so picking up a fourth character just to counter Min Min feels like I'd be wasting my time. Like I mentioned before, Lucina is a fundies character, which means she doesn't have any obvious glaring weaknesses like my other two boys do. So I've taken the time to learn the matchup, and I'd say it's helped my Lucina greatly improve, not only in terms of fighting Min Min, but in Smash in general. I'd love for you guys to think I'm actually correct in this game, but I'm only just starting to scratch the surface of what it means to go to tournaments and actually put effort into genuinely improving. And it took me learning this matchup to pretty much indirectly get myself to learn how insane the defensive part of Lucina's playstyle is. I already knew she had that strength as a zoner, like I'm not that far behind, but this experience definitely helped me improve on it and really made me begin to play keeping in mind her potential in that field. Sometimes learning a tough matchup can help you drastically improve your main across the board and not just in how you deal with that one guy in your bracket. It also helps you how to learn to play around your own character's weaknesses, which in the long run will make having a secondary less and less necessary. I've researched people saying solo maining is over, but I've also heard others say matchups aren't very important in this game anymore, because it's too well balanced for actual unwinnable matchups to exist. I don't know if I agree with that entirely, but it is true that generally, for the most part, the better player does win. But like, for example, Pikachu versus Ganondorf, the better player does win, but you're gonna have to be a lot more than the better player if you're Ganon, because I mean, look at him. All matchups do is measure the amount of skill you need to have over your opponent to win. If I'm Lucina and I'm fighting Cloud, who's apparently a slightly bad matchup for me, I need to fight slightly better than Cloud. If I'm fighting DK, then he's gonna have to be way better than me, because Lucina is one of the best edgeguarders in the game, and it's actually so easy to stop the monkey from recovering. Plus, he's a grappler, so it'll be harder for him to grab me because Lucina's up in the air a lot. It's tough for DK, but even still, I'd be lying if I said I agree that unwinnable matchups exist in Smash. Now I'm just rambling, this doesn't have a lot to do with the video, but I felt it was relevant enough to leave in. So, moving on. Personally, I didn't pick Byleth up to cover Lucina's weaknesses. I just played them because I like them, and I love their original game, and I was really excited to see them be announced for Smash. Hot take, I know. So I'm not exactly the best example of a perfect main and secondary core in Smash. Still, just because they don't perfectly cover each other's weaknesses doesn't mean there's no point in having Byleth as a secondary. Their playstyles are still way different though, like if I end up fighting against someone who's easy to read, then Byleth is gonna have a lot of fun there. But it is true that me, personally, I learned them for fun. Given I play Lucina, I don't really need a secondary, but if you do, then here's a couple sentences on that, because I feel like this video is starting to get a little too long and I'm moving soon, so I want to finish this before all that happens. But of course, before I move on, something huge I should have mentioned before is that all of this video is assuming that the person that is making you consider picking up a secondary is around the same skill level as yours. If you're struggling against someone in their main, just make sure you're struggling against the character and they're not just better at the game. If this is why you keep losing to this person, then I don't know, get good. Keep practicing, and if you manage to catch up to their skill level somehow, you might not even need to pick up another fighter. But anyway, if your decision is still a yes, how you pick up a secondary is up to you. It could just be because you want to fight a specific character or a specific archetype, or like it was with me, it could just be the character you enjoy playing the most besides your main. If you're picking up Pikachu because you main Peach and you need to kill Min Min, don't learn Pikachu in the context of how he beats Min Min. Learn Pikachu as a whole, explore his moves, play against everyone and not just the person you keep losing to. See what he can do. Pikachu's really good and will probably end up covering more bad matchups than just Min Min. So if you're already cutting your time to focus on a second character, ideally it's for more than just to fight one person playing one character, right? Something that also helps is like look up your main's matchup chart and check out their bad matchups. Maybe the character you struggle with is apparently an even fight and you're just being silly, or if you're right and it is a tough matchup, you can find who else is a bad matchup and use this information to find out who in the roster does well against these guys, so you're not picking up a character to cover one of your main's weaknesses, but multiple, if not all of them. In conclusion, assuming you're fighting someone of a similar skill level, secondaries are meant to be brought out if you feel like your main doesn't offer you the tools you need to beat specific fighters. It's always good to explore new playstyles for fun or because you're looking to add someone to your competitive roster, but keep in mind that you could improve a significant amount if you do it the hard way and stick to your main. Some see picking up a secondary as a shortcut, a way to skip learning about the game, which is why some players who do have secondaries advise against it until you reach their level, and others see it as an opportunity to learn more aspects of the game and more playstyles, or a way to stop wasting time grinding terrible matchups and improve on fighting the more common fighters. I don't know, it's pretty much always dependent on what level you'd say you are in Smash. After watching this video, hopefully now you know if you're the type of player who needs a secondary or who's better off sticking to your main, at least for the time being. It's all up to you. That was cheesy, sorry. No, okay, before you leave the video, make sure to subscribe and leave a like if you made it to the end, which you did if you're hearing this. And if you're active on the Discord and tune in to the live streams, I'm moving soon for 6 months, so while I get all of that sorted out, I'm not going to be streaming as much, so apologies for that in advance. But I'll try to come back to streaming as soon as I can. Alright, bye.